Assalamu alaikum. Hi everybody. This is IELTS with Shayban. The first episode, the first movie today is about task 1 and the types of task 1. Of course, in IELTS, academic IELTS, there are different types of task 1, and this is a brief about the types of task 1 required for academic writing. We are going to start with task 1 writing, and in task 1 writing the student should write a summary about different types of graphs, and this summary should be 150 words minimum, and of course the maximum could be around 160 to 180. The types as illustrated on the screen, it could be a graph, a bar chart, a pie chart, a table, multiple diagrams, that means more than one, sometimes 2, 3, even 4. And the language of processes, so we have either a process, describes maybe a factory or tuna factory, or a cycle, maybe a life cycle of an insect or an animal. Then we have illustrations and how to show, for example, two different digital cameras and what are the differences between them. And finally, we have maps, and in these maps, maybe we have maps about present cities and future projections for these cities. The first language which is used in IELTS Task 1 writing is called language of change. This means, for example, when we talk about graphs and the language of change here, we have something changing, or the data is changing either by going down, for example, as you can see here on the table, like decreasing, falling, dropping, or going up, increasing, rising, growing, doubling, trebling, or no change, constant change, fluctuate, and reaching a position, that means reaching a high or reaching a low. The most important thing to be noticed for this type of language of change is to show how much is the change. Is it a small change, as you can see on the right corner of this table? Small change, that means a steady, slightly, gradually, or a slight, a steady, a gradual change, or large change. This is extremely important for accuracy. So for people who want to achieve more than band 6 or 7, or even more than 7 in IELTS, one of the issues needed is accuracy. And this accuracy can be shown by showing the language of change. Is it a small change or a large change? As you can see in the following figure. The figure here, for example, shows the consumption of 3 types of food: hamburger, fish and chips, and pizza. As you can see here, we have in the axis, in the horizontal, in the vertical and horizontal axes, we have years 1970, 1975, 1980 till 1990. This language of change here shows the graph going up, and you have to notice 3 things in here. Number 1, you have to select the main changes. For instance, this one here, that means this shows the lowest, we say trend, or the lowest percentage throughout the years. Then you have to choose, for instance, in 1980, that the trends, they were for fish and chips and pizza, they were nearly the same, or they are the same after 1980. And finally, you have to show the highest trend. So number 1 is to show me the main changes. Number 2, you have to show me how much is the change. Is it a big change or a small change? For instance, if you look here at fish and chips in 1970, here till 1990. So you can see here it's a very big change. So you can talk about when you use the language of change, you have to show me significant, remarkable, we say distinctive changes. Also, if you look here, for example, about pizza, for example, if you look at pizza in 1970 and pizza in 1990, in these 20 years, for example, the change is not big. So this is either a slight or, let's say, non-significant. Again, if you look, or finally, if you look at hamburger, for example, for burgers from 1970 to 85, here we have a gradual change. So when the candidate shows these types of changes, that means big changes, small changes, and even between the changes between the big and the small, let's say gradual, non-significant, in this way, that shows more, let's say, accuracy. Finally, and the final stage, and the student should show, after using the language of change, language of how much or how far the change is, you have to show comparisons. I mean, you have to select maybe one or two comparisons between the trends. For example, if you take in 1970 again, if you go back to 1970, and the comparison when you compare the hamburger, the fish and chips and a hamburger together with pizza, so you can see here a big difference between around, let's say, around 3 times. That means 300 to around 100. So this is around almost 3 times higher. Also, if you compare between maybe the pizza again and the fish and chips, and again in the final year, it is a significant change. One last thing is called consistency. To be consistent here, you have to start, for example, from 1970, and then you move forward to the year 1990. So try when you describe a trend or you describe a graph, you have to be consistent. That means don't jumble. Don't jump from, let's say, 1970, then you go to 1980, then you go back to 1975. That will make the graph very difficult to be followed, and it's not going to be really good thing to do, especially in IELTS exam. If we have a graph like this, so what are the stages, or again as a summary for writing about the language of change? So again, we have some figures going up, some figures going down, we have big changes, and we have non-significant changes. So we have to select, number 1, so you have to select your, let's say, trends, number 1. 2, you have to show me the big or small changes. And finally, number 3, you have to show comparisons. The second type of language use is the language of comparisons. Of course, in IELTS, we have the language of comparisons, and it is one of the most important, we say, language use should be used by IELTS candidates. The table shows, for example, different types of different types of techniques of how to use comparative and superlative comparisons. For example, if I look at the graph in here, we say for example, here we say, in contrast to B, A is larger by a narrow margin. This is called a concessional sentence. Concessional means to show the other view than your view. For example, in contrast to B, this is the other view, A is larger by a narrow margin. So A here is the most important point to me. This technique using concessions can give a very good, we say, grammar point, which is an advanced level of grammar here. Also, the meaning is clear. Also, we can use other, we say, types of comparisons. As you can see here, for example, we say you can use A is over, under, 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, as large as great as high as. Again, the same point as I said previously for language of change. Here again, you have to show how much is the difference. Is it a narrow, marginal difference, or a considerable and, let's say, great difference? Language of comparison is one of the main issues needed for cohesion. That means, and we say task achievement for task 1. So if you want to achieve your task and to make it very clear, you have to show comparisons very clearly. To make a revision, as you can see here in front of you, we have 2 tables and 2 figures. One of them shows Japanese tourists traveling abroad and Australia's share of Japan's tourist market. Here we have 2 types of, we say, graphs. We have language of comparisons, and we can use here the language of comparisons, how to talk about, let's say, the different, we say, Japanese tourists traveling abroad, and we can have these since 1985 till 95, that means a decade. And you can see all the bar charts here, they represent some time or some kind of change. And the comparison here is a must. Why it is a must? Because it's consists of bar charts. While the second graph shows language of change, that means increasing and decreasing. So we can have, let's say, some big changes in 1985, for example, for Australia's share of Japanese tourist market. Again, the graph starts from 1985, and we can have, this is, we say, a gradual. Then we have a little change, slight drop in here. So this can say a decrease or a decline. Then another steady, let's say, slight or gradual increase, reaching till 1993, then a little drop till 1994. Again, the 3 things which are extremely important here, you have to select. For example, I select these 2 trends in here. Then I talk about maybe the 1991. Then I choose maybe talking about the trend in 1995. So choosing the main, and of course showing comparisons, number 2, and number 3, how much is the difference? Is it a big difference or a slight difference? It is noticed here in this graph, for example, there is actually not a big difference between the trends. Now, for the language of change in this graph again, you have to select, maybe you select this year here. Then you can talk about the gradual change in here. Then the slight in this point, and then finally this point. Again, it's not talking about all or every single year individually. And if you do that, you are making a big mistake, which is not a summary, because task 1 is a summary. So you have to summarize the information by number 1, selecting, Number 2, selecting the main features. Number 2, making comparisons where relevant. And number 3, you have to show the change. Is it a big change, a small change, a big difference, a significant difference, and so on. The third type of IELTS is the cycles or the processes. And as you can see here, we have a life cycle of a frog, and in the cycle or the process, we have to focus on certain issues. Number 1, because it's a cycle, that means it has a beginning stage, middle stage, and final stage. So number 1, and most importantly, is to show this is the beginning of the cycle. For example, if we say consider mating here is the first stage, you have to say this is the first stage where the cycle begins. Then after that, you have to show me the stages. That means middle stages and final stages. So number 1, you have to show in the cycle the process the stages of the process, and this is extremely important for task achievement and cohesion. That means to achieve the task correctly and to make it clear and to be understood again very clearly. Also, after you use the stages thing or the staging thing, you have to show me, we say, topic development. And this development here, or fully developed task, is to show some of the, we say, purposes or results. For example, for instance, if you look here about this, let's say, small tadpole in here, and if you compare it with the tadpole develops in here, so we can have some changes. For example, the tadpole develops, let's say, some legs in here. So if you want to fully develop your article, we say this stage includes the animal developing some limbs, and this would help it to move or to swim in the future. Also, if you talk about the tail in here, the tail gets bigger, so that makes the animal swims faster or swims better in the aquatic, let's say, environment. Now, if you look here at this graph in here, for example, you can see that the mature frog, now in this figure, you can see there are some grass in here. So the part of the animal is in the water and the other part out. So you can develop here, we say, in this stage, the animal becomes mature and ready to mate again, and it can, for example, breathe the air, or it is now can live on land, or it because it's an amphibian, so it can here in this stage can live in and off water. Again, showing comparisons here is a must. So because it's a cycle, this is not a bar chart or a pie chart, or it is a graph. So you have to make a comparison between maybe the beginning and the end. Also, one very important issue is called word formation, because it is a cycle, and in this cycle we don't have much vocabulary. So if you look here, we have quite few number of words, like frog spawn or small tadpole emerges and develops and young frog. So here the language doesn't help much actually to write 150. So one technique is called word formation. So tadpole develops, you can say development of tadpole, or emerging of tadpole, or maturity, or being matured, or getting to become matured. So here, or to mate. So you can change the word formation. A very important issue is to show the purpose of the stage, and this is part of the topic development. So we say stage A is done so as to produce stage B, or the product in A is finished, so it is ready to produce or to go through stage 2. Also, to show cause and result. And again, this is part of the development. For example, if you remember when we talked about the life cycle of the frog, so we say the animal develops a small tail, and this would help the animal for its movement in the aquatic, we say, environment, or to swim in the water. The fourth and the final type of, let's say, language of used in task 1 writing is to compare between, we say, illustrations. As you can see here, we have 2 types of mobile phones, an old type of mobile phone and a modern and contemporary mobile phone. The language here, again, it's not really difficult, and as you can see here, we have just different types of usages. So the student should use the language needed for this from this table. As you can see here, we have language of showing the position and showing the purpose. And of course, when you talk about these illustrations or these figures, you have to show the position and the function or the purpose of that area. For example, if we talk about, if you look at the figure again, we can see, for example, in the first figure, the first figure, you can see here the screen here is different from the screen here in the contemporary. So you can say, for example, on the top side or the top part of the mobile, there is a black and white display screen where users can just see the numbers and maybe the names of the colors. While in the contemporary mobile phone, the full color display or full color, we say, screen is used maybe to display videos, pictures, photos taken by the camera. So this is showing again the position and showing the purpose. One of the other issues, or we say the common type of questions that come in the exam also is the maps. And as you can see here in this figure, we have 2 different maps, we say before and after. And again, many students find this type of questions very challenging, because when you have a first look at this figure, maybe you say what I'm going to talk about, or what are the things I should cover. Again, remember, this is an academic test, so you have again to write a summary, to present a summary, and this summary will be written by selecting, reporting main features, and make comparisons where relevant. So again, if you select here, for example, you talk about the map before, so we can say no, actually nothing here except some palm trees scattered around the island. And when you go to compare it, for example, we start with the beach area. It's a deserted, we say, area. Before it was really deserted, nothing is there. Then you can compare it with the new swimming, let's say, area. Then again, in the middle here, if you talk about the big changes in here, so, or in the area, so number 2, so you can compare with the restaurant, and then you develop why the restaurant is there, maybe, for example, for dining, or for we say serving food for guests. And again, you can talk about, for example, a point here where the yachts are in the southern part of the island. So here you can say where it's the only way to get into the island by using these yachts to get into the island, where in the past there wasn't a place or a route, a direct route to the island. Also, you can talk about, for example, finally, about the type of, we say, huts or accommodation, scattered around the island. And you can again show that they are designed in a way to accommodate people, very comfortably, because they are located on the left and the right side of the island. Also, you can mention, for example, no change has happened to the, let's say, to the left, to the right side of the island, where nothing has changed in here. So we can say that no change. And if you mention no change, it's part of describing actually the figure. Another important issue in IELTS is the multigraphs. And in IELTS, there are two types of multigraphing. Number one, or the first type, when we have similar trends. Similar, I mean, when, for example, when we have pie charts, as you can see in the figure here. So we have two countries, it is Yemen and Italy. And in these figures, you can see that the pie charts, actually, they represent the same, let's say, talking about the same age groups. So, for example, from 0 to 14 years, then we have from 15 to 20 to 59, and finally the elderly groups, 60 years and more. So they are because similar, so we can say pie chart here, same age groups. And again, the same processes needed in the previous, we say, types of task 1, you can have them in here. So this is the first type, or the first type when they are similar. The second type is when we have different graphs. For example, these two, for example, figures, they talk about Japanese tourists traveling abroad and Australia's share of Japan's tourist market. Of course, both they talk about Japan's tourism and Japan's tourist market, but one of them is about traveling abroad, Japanese traveling abroad, and the other one is talking about Australia's share. So you can see here a bar chart with a line graph. So here, this is type 2 of IELTS, or we say multigraph. This is the second type, and they are different. One nice technique is to separate them. I mean, you can talk about the first graph first, then secondly, you come and talk and describe the second graph. So in this way here, you'll cover both of them. To summarize, IELTS Task 1 is just to write an academic summary, and this academic summary covers, as I said previously, graphs, bar charts, pie chart, tables, multiple diagrams. That means more than 2 or more than 1 diagram, maybe 2, maybe 3, maybe even 4, and a process or a cycle, and illustrations and maps. The next class is going to be about how to start writing your paragraphs, or what are the stages or the points needed for giving a nice and a very good, illustrated introduction, then how to write a body, and then how to write a conclusion. All right, everybody. As we have seen previously, some types of task one writing, academic writing. And to summarize, task one is a summary, and you have to select the main, we say, trends and or main issues in the graph or in the pie chart or the bar chart. So you have to select the main issues. I suggest 4 to 5 things. Then you have to show comparisons where relevant, and that depends on the task. If it is a bar chart, so you have to use more comparative, structures. And if it is a line graph or a bar chart, you have to show less comparatives. Also, you have to show, we say, the topic development. I mean, when you give a point, you have to explain it fully. One last thing, for task one, remember, no personal views in task one. Nothing, no extra data, for example, personal feelings, even if the task is part of your job. Maybe you are an engineer and you are dealing with such charts. Please do not add any extra data. The next class is going to talk about how to write task one, starting from the introduction, the body, and the conclusion. Good luck, everybody. This is IELTS with Shayban.